In the spring of 1922, in the farmlands of rural Bavaria, neighbors went to check on a family they hadn't seen in 4 days. What they found inside was 6 bodies, but that's not the part that makes this case impossible to forget. The part that keeps people up at night is this. Someone had been living in that farmhouse after the murders. The fire was burning and the cattle were fed. Food had been eaten from the kitchen, and for 4 full days, no one knew. This is Hinterkaifeck. The farm was called Hinterkaifeck. It means simply behind Kaifeck, a small settlement in Bavaria, roughly 70 kilometers north of Munich. In 1922, it was the kind of place where your nearest neighbor was far enough away that if something happened, no one would hear it. 6 people lived there. Andreas Gruber, 63 years old, the patriarch, a hard man. His wife, Cecilia, 72. Their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, 35, who had moved back to the farm with her 2 young children after her husband died in the war. Cecilia, her daughter, 7 years old. Joseph, her son, 2 years old. And then on the very last day of March, 1922, the day the murders happened, a new maid arrived at the farm. Her name was Maria Baumgartner. She was 44 years old. Her sister walked her to the door, said goodbye, and left. It was Maria's first day. It was also her last. The strange things had been happening for months. The Gruber's previous maid had quit 6 months before the murders. She refused to say much about why, but those who pressed her said she kept talking about the attic. She heard footsteps up there, at night, heavy ones. She believed the house was haunted, and she wasn't going to stay. Andreas laughed it off, told people she was foolish. Then, in late February 1922, Andreas himself found something he couldn't explain. Footprints in the fresh snow, a trail of them leading out from the edge of the dark Bavarian forest and going directly toward the farm's machine shed. He followed them. He examined them. There were no footprints going back. Whoever had walked from that forest to his farm had not walked back. Andreas told his neighbors about this. He told them about the footprints. He told them about a Munich newspaper he'd found on the property, a paper nobody in the household had bought from a town nobody had recently visited. He told them his house keys had gone missing, and then the night before the murders, Andreas and the family heard it themselves. Footsteps in the attic, above their heads. Andreas took a lamp and went up to look. He found no one, but someone had been up there. Evidence found after the murder suggested that the attic had been used, disturbed items, evidence of habitation. Whoever was living in that attic above the Gruber family had been there for weeks. No one survived to say exactly what happened that night. What investigators pieced together came from evidence, from wounds, from the positions of the bodies, but the broad shape of what happened is deeply disturbing. Sometime on the evening of March 31st, someone lured the family members out of the house and into the barn, one by one. How? The investigators weren't sure. Perhaps they heard something. An animal in distress, a noise in the dark. Perhaps they were called. Perhaps they simply went out to check and never came back. Andreas went first, then Cecilia, his wife, then Victoria, and then little Cecilia, 7 years old. Whoever was waiting in that barn struck them down, one after another, with a mattock, a heavy farming tool, similar in shape to a pickaxe. When it was done, the killer went back into the house, into the bedroom of the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had been at this farm for less than 12 hours. She was killed in her bed, then into the room where 2-year-old Joseph lay sleeping in his cot. He was killed there too, and then the killer covered the bodies in the barn with straw and stayed. For 4 days, neighbors walked past Hinterkaifeck and saw smoke from the chimney. The cattle were fed and watered. Someone had to do it, or they would have made noise. Food disappeared from the kitchen. Someone slept in the beds, and no one came to check. A young neighbor girl came by to visit little Cecilia. She knocked. She waited, found no one, and left. Coffee sellers came to take an order on April 1st. They got no answer. They moved on. For 4 days, whoever killed 6 people in that farmhouse simply lived there among them in the same rooms, at the same table. A calendar on the wall showed March 31st. Someone had torn the page off and moved it to April 1st. That's not someone fleeing a crime scene. That's someone who felt at home. On April 4th, neighbors finally came to investigate, and the mail hadn't been collected in days. The children hadn't been seen. Lawrence Schlittenbauer, a neighbor who knew the family well, led the group. What they found first was the house. Joseph, the 2-year-old, dead in his cot. Maria, the maid, dead in her room. Then they went to the barn. Underneath the hay, stacked together, Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and 7-year-old Cecilia. The autopsy would reveal something that haunted every investigator who heard it. Cecilia, the child, had been struck, like the others, but she had not died immediately. She had been alive in that dark, frozen barn, surrounded by her family. When they found her, her small hands were full of her own hair. She had torn it out. In the hours before she died, alone in the dark, the last thing she did was pull out her own hair. No one came for her. No one heard her. The investigation was compromised from the start. By the time the Munich police arrived, 45 miles away, dozens of neighbors had already walked through the farmhouse. Evidence was contaminated, footprints disturbed, things moved. Lawrence Schlittenbauer, or the neighbor who had led the search party, had reportedly rearranged items inside the house, picked up the infant's body, moved things around the crime scene. He was questioned repeatedly. He was never charged. But in 1925, he was found revisiting the demolished farm site. When asked why, he said the killer's attempt to bury the bodies had been difficult because the ground was frozen. How did he know that? Over the years, more than 100 suspects were considered. Some pointed to Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband, officially killed in the First World War, but some returning soldiers claimed they had seen him alive in Russia years after the war. Others pointed to a far-right paramilitary group operating in Bavaria at the time. In 2007, students from a German police academy reopened the case using modern forensic techniques. Their conclusion: impossible to solve. Too much time, too much evidence lost, too many witnesses dead. They did name one person as their primary suspect. They refused to release the name, out of respect for living relatives. The case was officially closed in 1955. It has never been reopened. The farm itself was demolished in 1923. The land has sat empty ever since as 6 people, one night, a killer who didn't run, someone who sat in that farmhouse for 4 days and in the same rooms as the bodies, fed the animals, ate the food, tore the calendar page, and was never found. More than 100 years later, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of Germany's oldest and most disturbing unsolved cases, and the detail that no explanation has ever touched, the footprints that led from the forest to the farm and never led back, suggest that whoever did this had already been there long before that night. Living above them, subscribe, because the next case is worse.